Good to see you all. Full house at Coinscrum when we have our first pure Bitcoin conversation in a long time. And everyone turns up, which is a good sign, which was kind of my thinking at the back end of last year. So well done, Bitcoin. See? Honey Badger, all that. It was kind of my thinking at the back end of last year, which was like, all the noise was finally dying down. But beneath the surface, there was interesting stuff happening and, things that we'll talk about tonight. Such as the Lightning Network, and things that were working from the get-go and on the mainnet, and people kind of trusted. And it made my sense was that we were going to, after all of that, excitement of the last 2 years, that we were going to start heading back and focusing on core issues at the base layer and the second layer of the real interesting projects, which. Not discounting anything else, but we started out as a Bitcoin meetup group purely because there were no other coins. Namecoin, there was Namecoin at the time. So we chose not to be the London Namecoin group because we don't know if we'd have had the same success in the long run. But I don't know who was at the conference today, the Advancing Bitcoin conference. Excellent. Well, welcome here. I don't know if Leon's here, but congratulations, or thank you to Leon as well, because that was a great day today, and then another one tomorrow. And I think that today and this evening just shows that I think if nothing else, last year or the last 2 years, for me, price is just like a radio beacon that says, "Hey, look at me." And a lot of people came in, a few people, hopefully not too many people in here, got their fingers burnt, maybe buying a little bit too high, too many shit coins. But the reality is, at least it kind of opened up their interest, and I think has kind of led them on a path to the more serious projects, which this year we hope to just focus on those. And it's not just Bitcoin, there's other interesting projects as well. But saying that, we have, I guess, two Bitcoin purists, I'd say. Matt, you kind of were...
You're listing shitcoins now, right? Isn't that what the Twitter drama was?
Opened up with a hard one.
Okay.
So Matt and I will have to open this by saying that Matt and I know each other. We go way back. He was at a school that will not be named, about 10 miles away from my school, with
the good
worst
school, you mean?
the worst basketball.
Sorry,
the worst basketball team on the planet.
You mean the one that
UNC.
has beaten Duke
So
more years than Duke's ever beaten UNC?
National titles. That's all I gotta say.
Guys,
Yeah,
not
but
now.
no,
Not
no,
now.
There's
Now's
a
not the
little.
time.
Yeah, there's a little.
Outside
We're gonna elbow a little bit.
We'll take this outside afterwards, but we've got...
Is there a basketball court around?
Yeah, we'll find one. We'll make one in Finsbury Square. So before I introduce the guys, I'll let them introduce themselves because they probably know themselves better than I know them. Just on that theme of where I think we're heading, and interestingly, I was speaking to the guys at BTC Media that own Bitcoin Magazine, and they are or have relaunched Bitcoin Magazine as a pure Bitcoin journal, which again is interesting, and I know they're looking to put on a conference, which again comes back to this kind of theme of like this base level and more interesting aspect of the technologies now that people have are interested in it again. So there was an article last week, I don't know if anyone read, by Arjun Balaji, and he was looking at I think it's Thomas Sowell, a social theorist, and applying his kind of theories about constrained and unconstrained thinking, and applying that to what we've seen the last few years in this very tribal kind of divergence across these different kind of projects and networks. And it's obviously a well understood theory in social theory in general, but applying it to this space of how we've seen different networks launching, forks, and those different trains of thought and how it applies and whether it's healthy. And just very simply, constrained thinking is that you accept change is happening, there's very interesting new things to work with, and new technologies, but you accept that there has to be trade-offs over time, and that no amount of new technology is going to change kind of very well embedded millions of years of human history in terms of people's way of thinking. And that you just accept that change will happen, but there would be trade-offs, and things will happen as they happen. And then on the other side, you have unconstrained thinking, which is whatever's happened in the past, we're throwing it out the window, and we're just going to go crazy, and everything's new, and it will all happen. It will happen tomorrow. And I think we can all probably think of analogies in this space of different networks that have taken those different approaches. And obviously Bitcoin's always, for me, has had that very slow and steady approach. And I guess as a Bitcoin, so-called Bitcoin maximalist, I've kind of, always said that these events from very, very early on that, this is probably going to take 20 to 50 years to really embed itself. And if it takes that long, it takes that long. And if we look at how technologies have evolved, it does take that long. If your email was invented in 1971 and really only went mainstream in 94, 95 when Hotmail came along, because it needed so many other technologies and layers to come along to actually make it viable and for human behavior to change and for the user experience to be there. And Bitcoin's roots were back in 1983 with David Chaum's paper on blind signatures. And again, so Bitcoin itself was 25 years in the making, you could argue. And probably before that with early proponents of the internet thinking that money was going to be embedded at some point. So I think these things take time. So without me chatting on too long and boring everyone, I think it's interesting to see everyone here tonight, to hear these guys. I think it's a good time to look back on everything of the last 2 or 3 years. And in terms of if you think I guess if you put platforms such as Ethereum in that unconstrained camp, the argument in the article is neither is right or wrong, and both mutually benefit in the long run, because in essence everyone's ultimate objective is the same, and if you get there on different paths, then so be it. And if you get feedback from each kind of mistakes along the way, from kind of other trains of thought, then it's not a bad thing. So what I wanted to do today is really, because I think there's been so much noise, and again, just very quickly, I was at a conference last week and there was 2 projects, or people from 2 projects that have been around for some time, again, more in that kind of Bitcoin purist camp, and it struck me that the narrative was they're still trying to kind of create a narrative that fits. And the narrative for Bitcoin's changed over time of like a single global payment system, one currency for all, and then it's like, well, then we're going to be digital gold, and trying to find the right conversation to attract more people in, I guess. But I think for myself, working on my own startup, looking at things like custody and how institutions might engage in this space and the challenges around that and the realities of that. I think there's a few basic things which are very simple, which I guess we'll be speaking to you about how far forward we've moved with them, and challenges which are critical to the space in general, things like custody, things like key management, user behavior, what's really needed to make this go the next mile or next 10 miles and become adopted, and how long does that take? And other interesting things which Matt's done a lot of work on and applying a lot of his attention to is around mining, and obviously there's the proof of work and the proof of stake conversation around that. But if you believe that these technologies are going to be around, if you believe that proof of work mining is a good thing, then it has to be around if Bitcoin's going to survive. But what does that look like in the future? So that is how I'm framing the conversation. And I'm going to now hand over to you guys, introduce yourselves, tell us what you've been working on, and we'll take it from there. And I'll interject to allow audience questions as well. A few of you sent in some questions beforehand. It's a fireside chat. We've got the brandy. So, it's an interactive thing. So I'll start
We
with you.
don't have a fire, though.
We were trying to get the fire, but we had computer issues. We were going to have fires. Next time, we'll have a fire. Jeremy, how about we start with you?
Sure, just intro and...
Just tell us about, a bit of your background, how CASA came about, and, you're working on two of the interesting components that I mentioned there about custody, key management, and the Lightning Network, and these are areas that you cover. So tell us a little bit more. And you can try selling a few kind of CASA nodes as well. We'll take a commission.
I brought one.
Excellent.
So, all right, so my name is Jeremy Welch. I am the founder and CEO of CASA. Before I start just shilling CASA nodes up here, how many people actually have tried a CASA node before? Anybody? Awesome, we have some hands. Okay.
$600. That's $600.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so it's like we're getting more and more hands that like the further we go, and it's crazy to see how fast this is growing. But so I started this company actually before we were doing key management, before we were doing anything else. We were starting to build an application, a decentralized application, partially using Blockstack, which is a decentralized DNS, which is a kind of next evolution beyond Namecoin, actually. And as we were doing that, we got a really good idea for what we think the next computing stack is going to look like. What we think that all apps will eventually be, how all apps will eventually be built. And it's not, compute on chain. It's not, there's a mix of what's going to happen, but and actually part of my talk tomorrow is kind of on what this wave looks like. But it involves nodes in every home. It involves all of you managing keys. It involves all of your data being encrypted. So even if it is running on a cloud server, that's okay because it's encrypted, and you're going to decrypt it before you actually digest it and use it. There's a lot that's coming that we see coming, and we wanted to start participating in that. And so we were looking at our application. It was very clear that the application wasn't going to work until we addressed some of the lower level problems. So the two problems that we specifically picked out, key management is the main one because that spreads across the entire stack, I would say. And then the kind of local computing angle with the Casa node itself, which runs Bitcoin and Lightning. And we'll be doing a lot more this year. So we're excited with some of the stuff that we're launching later this year. But yeah, so that's Casa. And we think of it more as a Bitcoin computing company. We're not a financial firm. And we're building a lot more experiences. The key management side and the node side are just kind of the first.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I'm Matt. I do various software engineering in the space. I've contributed a lot to Bitcoin Core. I've built various mining software, low latency relay for Bitcoin blocks. More recently, Lightning work, and also, what's the other thing I do? Mining protocol redesign. There's probably a few other things I've done. I don't know. I don't remember anymore.
Cool. Thank you. So, Matt, you kind of started working on contributing to Bitcoin Core when you were about 8 years old.
A little bit older than that, but not by much.
Not by much older. So, presumably, the rumors are that you're the bastard child of Satoshi. Well, that's just a rumor.
I mean, I can't comment.
No,
right?
we can't comment on that now. But we never know.
You know how Safedine has been talking about this child that was thrown in the jungle, and the Bitcoin, if it survived, and it would.
It's the second coming. Oh God, this is where it all begins. We won't go there. So
I need 3 more beers. Come on.
Just again, looking back at the history and how these things have kind of grown, I was reminded the other day that I think it was 2013. It was the day that Bitcoin peaked in 2013 at this crazy $1,200 high. And there was a conference just on Brick Lane. It was a great conference. And I was there with Jim Burton and Gary Rowe, who were working on Multibit, which was a very popular wallet at the time. And we were kind of everyone was a little bit aghast that, a year earlier, Bitcoin was trading at $10. Now it was over $1,000. And given, their contributions at the time, I said, it does. I mean, this is crazy, but it doesn't seem like the technology or Bitcoin Core itself. There's been some releases in the last year, maybe 2, I think. The technology hasn't moved on 2 orders of magnitude. It's great that there's this awareness and excitement and level of growth in adoption, but we haven't moved forward very far. But I think at that time, those releases were really kind of still battening down the hatches from some pretty poor early code that Satoshi wrote and kind of dumped on people like yourselves. So I guess it makes sense things weren't moving forward. You can't quantify an ongoing project in terms of percentages, how far forward it had moved at the time, but they said, like 1%. But since then, I guess, we've moved through these other hype cycles, and a lot more substantive work has been done, a lot more ideas have come to the fore. Matt, what's kind of interesting you in terms of what has been developed then since 2013? What progress have we made? In what's been delivered and being rolled out now, and also on the more conceptual and theoretical side. What's interesting you from your insight into the Bitcoin Core community? What's exciting them at the moment?
I think what excites me, to answer in a slightly different way, I think what excites me a lot about kind of the Bitcoin development community broadly is how much it's diversified from just Bitcoin Core to more than that. Right, I remember when I first got involved in Bitcoin it was 2011, there was only one wallet. It was the Bitcoin, just the Bitcoin software. It was called Bitcoin. We didn't call it Bitcoin Core. We didn't call it Bitcoin QT, anything like that. There was just one wallet. And there was a lot of concern. My biggest concern was always that we were going to wake up one day, there was going to be some remote code execution in the wallet, and the private key of every Bitcoin user was going to be on a paste bin somewhere, and there's nothing you can do at that point because you can't figure out who owns what money, and we just have to give up and walk away. But Bitcoin is not that anymore, right? There's a million wallets. There's really fancy custody solutions. There's now people building Lightning stuff. Bitcoin kind of protocol development is no longer just Bitcoin Core. And I've been really excited, especially as the Lightning community has grown, as the development community there has grown. There's a lot of really brilliant people working on that. And the fact that this is kind of diversified just in terms of projects and the vibrancy of the community broadly, I think is kind of the biggest change that I've seen by far. Of course, Bitcoin Core has made immense progress. As you mentioned, the code was not of the best kind of software engineering quality when it was first released, and that has been cleaned up a ton. There's always more to do, and there's always new things to add and new features to build, but separation and just cleaning up the code base has happened a lot too.
But is everyone comfortable now? I mean, remembering in 2013 when there was the fork from the upgrade, and there was a panic which was fixed in like 24 hours. Is the feeling that those bugs, those issues, those potential issues are kind of behind us and people can sleep at night, or does your average Bitcoin Core developer still kind of wake up in a cold sweat at some random nightmare they've had?
Well, we had an inflation bug late last year, so
Matt saved us. For people that don't know, Matt saved us from that.
I mean, I also introduced the bug, so
I wasn't going to point out that. I was going to try to cover up for you, but
well, thank you for saving us from yourself.
Yeah, it's very important.
So, in terms of
look, I mean, software bugs happen, right? And then there will always be the next bug. There's always more we can do. A lot of the history of Bitcoin Core has been trying to think deeply about how to engineer that kind of high reliability software. It's a relatively new model. You can take some inspiration from some of the life-critical safety software like you have in airplanes and medical devices and those kinds of things, but a lot of the ways that they accomplish their software engineering goals are different from what we can do realistically in the Bitcoin space. And so thinking deeply about how do we even go about building that kind of reliable system in the space is something we're always trying to do more and is definitely not a solved problem.
Mm-hmm. So back to this theme of constrained and unconstrained thinking, and it was just alluded to that you're supporting other coins. Crazy.
So I'm going to address the elephant in the room,
okay.
the shit coins in the room. No, so we actually have for more, I guess probably 6 or 7 months, we introduced Ethereum support back in September. So this is not actually something new, but we've always taken it on ourselves. We're a Bitcoin first company. We build everything for Bitcoin first. It is our priority. If something is broken or something changes, Bitcoin will take precedence over everything. Bitcoin forms the foundation of this kind of new computing model that we describe.
Can we turn the mics down?
Yeah, I don't know if it's mics or...
The mics are echoing. Can we turn it down a half step?
Maybe I'll hold a little.
Can you just turn your hold it?
So but anyways, our mission is to help people safely, securely store all of their assets. So we think that all assets, including even art, your home, your car, could eventually be tied back to private keys, right? Management of private keys. We think that managing those private keys are a way that you will even just validate a signature one day. Instead of signing your signature by hand, you might do that with a key one day. You'll use a Trezor, you'll plug it in, you'll do a quick signature, and you'll go on your way. And so our approach is that everything is going to be tied to this. So it's a little silly to distinguish between whether it's Bitcoin or it's a car or it's some other shitcoin, as a lot of people say, and a lot of people are giving us flack for. Our goal is to help people. Our mission as a company is maximizing personal sovereignty and safety, right? So it's not maximizing Bitcoin, although we are Bitcoin first. The reason why we're Bitcoin first is because we think it actually supports that core mission of maximizing personal sovereignty. And we're going to continue to add other data types, other assets, but everything will kind of support in that sovereign customer first and kind of personal safety view is the whole point.
So just to that point then, and exactly, the point of this discussion isn't to dismiss like other networks and these innovative ideas, and the unconstrained thinking is like that's going to potentially positively feedback as a whole into the kind of the systems as a whole. So, but I think the reality is that it, hopefully we'll kind of at least be able to focus on a small number of them. And a small number that are offering something or potentially offering something valuable that either Bitcoin can't now or potentially never will be able to in the future. I mean, for both of you, but Matt, or whoever wants to dive in, which other networks, so this is a question that actually kind of popped up a few times when I asked people to kind of send some in, is which ones interest you and why? And which ones do you think actually they're not a good idea? We can edit this out.
I think I might have answered this on a podcast this morning. Let me see if I can remember what I said. It's a long time ago. I think there's a lot of, I think kind of my interest or my continued interest in Bitcoin more so than other things stems primarily from our history in building precedent around how changes get made. Right. So I'm not necessarily more interested in Bitcoin at a technical level, although I think obviously the majority of development has gone into Bitcoin, at least in the protocol level, not necessarily in building things on top. But we've definitely had more experience in Bitcoin of setting precedent around how changes get made to be more conservative and to consider the views of more stakeholders, right? So we saw with the Bitcoin 2x, the SegWit 2x stuff, various other attempts at forking Bitcoin that you can't just fork Bitcoin rather easily. You can't necessarily change the rules. And specifically, I as a developer, and in fact the entire development community, can't unilaterally change the rules. And that's why I think Bitcoin is interesting, because I think that gives it more legs than other systems. That's not to say that I don't find the technology of other systems interesting. I mean, certainly I'm not a cryptographer, but I love a lot of the privacy research, the Monero and Mimblewimble kind of research. That cryptography is fascinating to me. I wish I could contribute more to it, but that's not my area of expertise. Obviously a lot of the kind of state channel research that's been going on by some of the academics, like Patrick, I don't know if he's here, he was here earlier today, are doing in like ETH that we're bringing back, the no input stuff, and Bitcoin kind of analogizes a lot of that research. So there is a lot of interesting research going on at a technical level, but ultimately my interest is building the system that I think has the most robustness, and that robustness comes from even the entire community of developers can't get together and make a change unilaterally.
Jeremy, do you have some thoughts? Obviously, with the work that you've been doing, and obviously you've had, it's no easy task to start supporting these other networks. There's a lot of it's a heavy resource overhead to do. So you've got to be confident that if you're going to apply that resource, that it's going to pay off. So how do you kind of assess what you're going to support, and what's the process for that?
Yeah,
because that applies
question.
to a lot of people within the industry.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, and a lot of the criticism we got is just because people are scared that we'll just go down the path of Coinbase or some other exchange and add hundreds of coins and add, and that's not going to happen. I mean, for us, it may be 1 to 2 or 3 a year, if that. But a lot of it for us is just driven by customer demand. So we actually have paying customers that are saying to us, hey, I have 95% Bitcoin, 98% Bitcoin, but I have 2% that is in Monero or Litecoin or something else. And so for us, it came down to kind of a question of safety for our customers, that if we're providing all this advice, and so we have this premium $10,000 per year service that is both software and service, and we help you spread out your keys and set up your multi-sig wallets. And our approach, as we started thinking more about this, was, are we actually putting a client at a security disadvantage and potentially at a security risk by having them use multiple systems? we can advise very closely. We know our code very well, and we can help them. And if something goes wrong, we're on it. We're available 24/7. We have a 24/7 phone line for our clients. That if something goes wrong, it's not just about your setup of your multi-sig. It's about really when things go wrong, like who is there, you have a direct line to the best engineering support and the best kind of client service and operation support. Will ship you Trezors or Ledgers anywhere in the world. If you were to lose one, it's a full service. And so as we think about that, and then we think about other assets that people are holding, if they're not getting that level of support, that's a problem. These are the same clients. So that's kind of how the initial decision happened. Now, on the topic of kind of how we think about or what other projects that we look to and how we think about things beyond Bitcoin, I want to piggyback on what you were saying about engineering. I think that there is a kind of new level of engineering that is emerging. We've hired people that have been around the Bitcoin space for a long time. We just hired an engineer that he formerly built an entire application or an entire kind of app suite across mobile and web for a HIPAA compliant system for hospitals, right? And he was already used to kind of this level of security engineering that I think that. So I worked at Google. Phenomenal engineers, but I will say that kind of a level, we have a few other Google engineers, and we've had this conversation where kind of the common level for them in terms of knowledge of security and being very careful with introducing changes and heavy test suites, et cetera, like it's not quite there. The level, if you make one change and then we wipe out billions of dollars worth of assets, and more importantly, this kind of foundation for a non-centralized world, which is what we view Bitcoin as, that's a huge issue. So you have to take things very slowly. And so we as we're looking at other projects, and as I'm looking at I mostly think about which teams and which engineers do I see that are being very careful. They're cognizant of the weight and the importance of Bitcoin as a base layer, and they're thinking about other problems, but they're kind of cognizant of the security layer and using it when they can. And one team that I'll mention like specifically because we work closely with them, I mentioned earlier, is the Blockstack team. They built a DNS layer, but it was actually pegged to Bitcoin. A lot of people don't realize that it's pegged to Bitcoin. So it's built on top of Bitcoin and it uses the security of Bitcoin. But there are other projects like that out there. I think we're going to see more projects this year and beyond that will somehow peg some sort of state, some hash that then they'll sync systems to Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is going to be the way that a lot of systems, if they fail, that they're going to be bootstrapped. And so I think the measure, without calling out any projects specifically, is just kind of how well the engineers are really thinking about security. And kind of approaching it that way.
Yeah. No, we actually had Manib Ali a few months ago here, and I'm a big fan of Blockstack as well, because, well, for multiple reasons. I'll give a shout out. It was the Commerce Block team talking about, again, one of my earliest thoughts on and this comes down to trust. Is some of the stuff that I was been looking at on my own project, and in general in this space is, and I remember this being, I think, in my first slide when I did a presentation to someone a few years ago, and it was all the talks about trustless systems, but I just don't. And again, maybe this is this constrained and unconstrained thinking. I don't believe that people want trustless systems because I don't think that's human nature. People want they want to blame someone else when things go wrong. They want to phone someone up and say, "Why the f has my money disappeared?" Excuse me. We'll edit that bit. I'll bleep it or something. Sorry. And everyone's looking at the monetary aspect of this potentially very solid, robust blockchain that was Bitcoin. And for me, it was always, well, surely the trust part's going to take years to build. People are it's going to take generations, well, at least one generation, for people to kind of completely change their mindset about what money is or what it could be. That doesn't, if you've grown up with an idea of what money is, you're not going to change many people's minds unless most people just don't have the inclination to think about it. So trust will have to kind of just happen over time, and time is the only thing that can build trust. And even then, you were talking about open technology. I mean, look at Heartbleed a couple of years ago, 20 years, critical to the whole security of the internet, and it was managed correctly. But if money's involved, there was no direct financial benefit there. if there's something that someone spotted and sits on for 5 years and
Zcash, right? Zcash, just the recent Zcash fix was a huge. They very, very carefully. I mean, they just released all the news about the fix that they put in place, but it could have been very bad.
Yeah, and so the question
It
is,
could be very bad. They can't know.
yeah. So I mean, and this is the thing. So how long does it take for trust to grow? And a couple of things here. A couple of things you mentioned. You mentioned about robustness, and I think if we did a word cloud in the conference today, trade-offs was a very strong theme. And we'll come onto the Lightning Network soon, and the Lightning Network is, it opens up massive opportunities. Potentially, it has, issues, and a lot of those we'll discuss today, and they've obviously been thought about. But there's trade-offs there. There's still trade-offs about, what you're gaining and what you're giving up, as with every layer that you go up. Again, obviously, over the last few years, this common theme is a lot of the excitement and the hype was about, the term smart contracts, which I guess we have Nick Szabo to thank. And I think someone mentioned this today, so sorry for the people that were at the conference, but it was in my notes already, and it's something that I've always said. I think it's probably obvious to most people that followed this for a while. With Bitcoin, Bitcoin has smart contracts, but they're very simple, they're very binary. And when they're very binary, people can trust them more. And if Lightning's been built on a kind of very small kind of, number of these very simple binary contracts, people can then trust that. I always say, the analogy I used to say to people was like, if I say to anyone like, tell me, yellow and blue, what color? Yellow and blue, what color? Combined. I thought you should know what yellow and blue are common. Okay, maybe it's a bad analogy.
Green, right?
Yeah, green, right, exactly. But that's fine, which isn't exactly. But people would trust that because everyone in the room would say green. But if I throw at you and if I say to you like, yellow, blue, mauve, fuchsia, bit of purple, what color do you get out?
I mean, I'm colorblind.
Well, you're colorblind, so okay.
Nothing helps.
But I think my point is that people need to, for people to be able to trust things, they really need to be sure of what the outcome is, and having not kind of Turing complete smart contracts where you're just creating all of these potential attack vectors. No one's ever going to trust them. I mean, work that I've been doing again personally, and going out, and, when you start speaking to people at the institutional level, they're really still, the story's been there for the last year, but they're still very nervous about engaging with this space at all. And this is like, right, well, we can have custody and it can be in a data center buried 4 miles underground. Maybe we'll trust that. But they're not going to be anywhere near trusting like a smart contract written by a coder to a year out of college. And that's kind of replacing the CME. Or the London Stock Exchange. And that's just not going to happen for a long time. The idea of using these blockchains and gradually migrating people across and saying, well, let's look at things which aren't value critical. So, time stamping as a reference point, and let's get comfortable with that and how that works. Maybe this is the way that we need to kind of gradually and slowly migrate people across and build trust in these systems. One of the things Manib was talking about was the idea of not smart contracts, but something just a little bit, somewhere in between maybe Bitcoin scripting versus the kind of all-encompassing kind of Ethereum-type smart contract, where he was talking about simple contracts. We had the guys from Zen Protocol last year, and they're looking just, developing specific contracts that apply to a specific use case for a specific industry. Is that where we need to head? Is this the trade-off? Or can we rely on Bitcoin to deliver everything?
I think the last one. So a couple big questions in that. I always position this, and the reason why we're Bitcoin first is that I describe Bitcoin as the most resilient system on the planet, and it's not a measure of, a lot of people are talking decentralization. It's not, decentralization is not important if it results in a crappy, unusable, and inefficient and unstable system. It's just not. If decentralization results in a resilient system that is stronger than anything else, and if you knock out kind of one, I joke and describe this as Skynet or a kind of T1000, right? That you whack it with something, you shoot bullets through it, it just keeps coming. Like that's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is at a resilience level that is higher than most any other system in the world right now. And it would take a significant amount, even for state actors to take it down. And so I think that, as we approach and as we think about kind of broader computing, it's kind of an inevitability that things will peg to Bitcoin and we'll use it as this kind of root layer, while it, as it continues to remain this resilient system. Now, the how further computing is kind of built out. So if you built a Facebook, but kind of in a new model that somehow interacted with Bitcoin or interacted with other systems, how would that work? Smart contracts would be involved. Our bet is that these devices will be involved too. You'll run a lot of code that just lives on this device and runs on this device, and then syncs to a chain and is transmitted out there into the world. And you'll also connect from device to device. So we will, later this year, we'll have an SDK for our device. You can build on top of that. You can build an app to talk from one Casa node to another Casa node, right? I think that we're going to end up with these layers to where you'll have some on-chain compute and some contracts that are running. Some of it will just be value and information transmission on these systems. Some of it will just be local computing that feels just like a local computer, like you had an iMac, and it's running something, but it's talking directly to another computer, and you won't be shut off. Like, you can't be deplatformed. That's one of the big issues with Facebook and YouTube and all these other companies today. And so I think that, again, it will be a variety of things, but the big measure, I think, is resilience, and that's what all of these layers should be judged on.
Thank you. So I think this actually, on that point, I guess you've both been working very closely on Lightning. Matt, you've been working on Lightning Rust, which is intended to be a library, because we've had all these different implementations of Lightning, which all seem to be working together just fine. Ish, You can tell us.
Yeah. So the
maybe just Maybe obviously Lightning's rolled out. How many people have kind of have tested Lightning Network? Cool. I played Lightning chess today, which was good. Which was the first time. I lost 5 Satoshis very quickly to John. John, where's my 5 Satoshis? You're here somewhere. Give everyone a rundown of the last year, because as I said, it's kind of rolled out. It's rolled out quietly. It doesn't seem to have broken. And maybe just give us a rundown of both of you, what you've been working on and where we're at and what the challenges are.
Yeah, obviously, everyone is super excited about Lightning, which is really good to see in the Bitcoin space. Even in the bear market, there's still just a ton of excitement in that community, and there's a lot of people doing interesting stuff building on top of Lightning, which has been really cool to see. Obviously, Lightning is still early. There's still a lot of user experience challenges. It's still the case today that if you want to receive a Lightning payment, you have to first open a channel and send a Lightning payment before you can receive a Lightning payment. Which is obviously kind of a really god-awful UX. And there are solutions to all of these problems. Routing is still not that reliable. We have great ideas of how to improve it. There's some really obvious things that can be done. There's some things that have already been done. There's more things to do, and more experience to be gained to optimize everything a lot. So it is still very early, despite all of the excitement, despite all of the people building things on top of it, and there's been great demos and really cool applications that people have actually used all over the place. But it's getting there, and I think almost, there's a lot of criticism of Lightning, but I think most of it is, in fact, just things that have engineering challenges, just practical things that take time and effort and competent engineers to build and solve and tune and optimize and fix bugs and all of these good things. And there's fewer criticisms that strike at kind of the heart of it and say, maybe this isn't actually great. And it has trade-offs, and there are use cases of Bitcoin that Lightning doesn't necessarily make sense for, and there are a lot of use cases for Bitcoin where Lightning enables new use cases that you didn't have previously. And so, one thing I look to as the Bitcoin development community continues to grow is diversity of different systems. So it's Lightning, it's also Rootstock and Liquid, potentially other types of side chains, all these kinds of other systems that you can build on top or beside or even Coinbase, even Bitcoin centralized wallets. These things are all important, but what we need to be careful of is how to accurately communicate to users exactly what the trade-offs are in using these different systems, what are the new and different trust assumptions in each one, and how do we make sure that every user is using the thing that is actually ideal for them and not just the one that is easy or that they've seen in the latest write-up of howtousebitcoin.com. Which I don't know if that's a site. Please, someone register that before that turns into a porn site.
What do you think the biggest trade-off is, and what's the one that in 20 years is like still bugging you that could just break at some point? In terms of watchtowers and monitoring the network, and there's risks about that ultimately. If you're relying on constantly monitoring a network, and if this is globally adopted, and you have these very large bank-like nodes, and Gmail went down, I believe, briefly last week, and if that happens, and if there's a panic and everyone floods the base layer network with their transactions to reclaim their coins, what happens if 3 million transactions hit the base layer at once?
Yeah, that's certainly a trade-off. I think that is a natural limit to Lightning scalability. You cannot. I don't think it's realistic for everyone in the world to have a Lightning channel. It doesn't scale that far, and that's certainly one of the kind of obvious failure modes. Is you have, I'm not too worried about everyone using Gmail, which I guess is kind of how email works these days, but that might happen. But even if that doesn't happen, it is definitely the case that you're not going to have a billion Lightning channels. It's just not realistic. I don't know that we necessarily have a better way to scale blockchains in a distributed sense, but there is a limit. And Lightning is not going to reach literally every human on the planet, at least in a non-custodial form. I think generally, obviously that's a limit, and I think there is some concern about are we going to exceed the limit without people noticing? Because it is a kind of after the fact thing that you see that we've exceeded the limit of where it should be reaching. But I'm not too worried about Lightning kind of just not working, right? I don't know exactly which niches it's going to fill and which niches it won't be able to fill, but I'm not too worried about kind of the Lightning we see today just somehow not working, or kind of some of the features that are promised today, which really aren't all that much more than it already can do, not working out in some way.
Okay.
Still reckless.
Definitely is.
It's still early software.
Yeah. Well, you can't even back up. You can't even back up channel state yet. And watchtowers, which for those of you who don't know, that you can watch actual channels and make sure those stay open and watch actors. And it's a lot of this tech is still very, very early, and we've wrapped a nice UI, made it easy to get on board and start using it, but it is still very, very early.
But saying that, I've not been getting enough up to speed on it. I was impressed today in terms of some of these things that I had been thinking about, and they were all generally mentioned as obviously having been considered, and theoretical solutions out there for them. Which ones do you think are most critical? Which problem? If people don't necessarily have the broader picture on what the issues are and what problems need solving, which do you think are the most critical and which interest you the most in terms of the more theoretical ideas that will possibly emerge in the not too distant future?
Something that I want more research on and think is kind of a easy, clearly interesting problem in Lightning is kind of mapping out exactly the privacy properties of it. So obviously, I'm sure most people are aware, Lightning does onion routing, and so when you receive a payment, you cannot immediately tell who sent it. That's very clearly by design. There's some proposals to also change it such that when you request a payment, you don't even tell the person who's sending the payment who you're sending it to, so there's no kind of static ID for either the sender or the recipient. And that's really awesome and improves things at a surface level, but there's also some or improves things against a passive attacker, but we know that there are active attackers in cryptocurrency trying to de-anonymize people. That's just a fact of how many of the businesses in this space work. And so mapping out exactly what different types of attacks, active attackers who are willing to spend money to map out the network on a regular basis, on a second by second basis. What are exactly those attacks that they can do, and how can we prevent them, and can we effectively prevent all of them? So we know some of them. There's some attacks you can do which are potentially very expensive in terms of routing fees, but potentially you can map out the instantaneous balance of nodes on the network and use this information to watch payments flow across the network. We know that this is a theoretical attack. It's probably prohibitively expensive, but there hasn't been a lot of really great research on that, and there are some theoretical solutions we could start to apply that might make it more difficult or more expensive. But again, there's just not a lot of kind of practical research in that space. So I'm less interested in kind of the engineering problems, because those are engineering problems. We'll work on them. They're fun to work on if you enjoy engineering, which I certainly do, but at a kind of theoretical level, they're just the thing. We know how to solve it. Sit down, go write some code, go write fun tests. Yeah.
Jeremy, anything to add on that?
I would just say, so we think a lot about key management and where your Lightning node lives. So Neutrino is coming. That's going to make things easier to start using Lightning. So it's a light client, and the security around running things today, I mean, as you mentioned, is still it's still very early. But we think a lot about key management generally, and whether that's some level of multi-sig tied into certain wallets. There are problems of, like, even if you leave your Casa node at home right now and someone walks in, an evil maid attack, and just grabs your device, right? And they've got your wallet, they've got everything now. There's a lot of improvements to be made, and I think that channels, state backup, watchtowers, all of this stuff that's coming this year will improve the network a lot. And back to that measure that we talk about, resiliency. Again, anything that is improving the resiliency is good.
Cool. Well, I would like to say on the subject, but I mean, I know we're running through time, and there's a few other things I want to get on, and I think you touched on them. And coming back to the work you're doing at Casa, is around user behavior or user experience and key management. And trying to get this kind of nirvana of the two meeting in the middle, and not having the one thing where trade-offs can't really happen is on security, but there has to be trade-offs even there, because how do we get this balance for what we've seen over the last few years is the original story of we're all going to be our own banks, but then we realize. At the start of 2017, everyone had their ledgers, and I'm like, I'm comfortable being my own bank. And at the end of 2017, people were a little bit less comfortable being their own bank. They're probably more comfortable again now, but everyone's got that threshold of of risk. And again, in this community, people probably have a little bit more or have learned to have a bit of more of a pain threshold. But the general population don't. Generally people want their money, they want to know where it is, and they want it to be safe. They don't want it disappearing. The fact that we still, Quadriga CX still happened last week, this far, again, this whole from a year ago of Goldman Sachs is setting up an institutional trading desk, and Fidelity coming in, and Northern Trust are going to be custodians, and everyone's adopting it. And something like that happens is that's 2011 stuff. BitThumb last year, and Parity wallet hacks for a misplaced kind of decimal point. And again, going back to this trust thing, within this community, people are like, 250 million went missing, 100 million went missing. But the guys that everyone's saying, well, they should be getting involved, they just don't buy that. They can't do that. They can't afford to have those risks. And again, as this scales, that 100 million becomes a billion, becomes 50 billion. So I know that and with Casa, you're addressing two of those things: the user experience, the idea of a more kind of social recovery model, which may be where this goes. If we think that for me, again, the stuff that we work on very early on, not kind of pushing the work that I've been doing or looking at in my own company, is, at the very beginning for me, it was like, okay, when these guys come in, my background's in trading, so I kind of know the market side. And at the very beginning, it was like, these guys are not going to go anywhere near any of these exchanges. Even if you become Coinbase and you're worth billions, and you're really well capitalized, they're not going to go anywhere near them, because that's not how, we've had 50 years of evolving regulation, which means, the way that the siloed exchanges work, you can't do that in traditional markets. You can't have an exchange being a custodian, being a broker, and, no Chinese walls in places. So, it was kind of obvious, but that's kind of what we're finding out now. And, probably for me, the most unique in terms of trying to keep everything simple, the most unique feature of Bitcoin is that for the first time you have a bearer instrument where you can share custody. And that doesn't exist in any other bearer instrument. The equivalent is having a bar of gold on the table, and it will only move when 3 different hands come and touch it. So that's unique. And in the traditional financial world, that should be interesting. And I think it probably will become interesting once they get comfortable with it. And I guess this is where you've been going. So that long prelude.
I think you need to be a Casa sales guy. Like you're hitting all the right points. The multi-sig was.
I think this is key. So I mean, you've got a product which is aimed at being consumer friendly, but also being robust enough for institutions. What have you discovered over the last year? What's the stories you're hearing?
Before you answer, can I beg the audience to bring me a cold lager from the fridge?
And me.
Can someone? Two cold lagers?
Opened. Oh, we got cold. I've got warm ones.
These can't be cold. They're not even opened.
They're not. There's
not
an opener there. We've laid everything on. You've got cheap brandy.
We're good. We got
cheap
some.
brandy.
Sorry, it's not too bad. It's not too bad, that brandy. It's okay.
You good?
Yeah.
Go on.
Okay.
Crack on. You've interrupted.
All right.
I'll have this.
Nice. So I key management, multi-sig itself, your description was perfect around a gold bar you touch. It's something that we don't have a model for. We've never experienced it before. And from that perspective, it takes people a while. I think the first time that people get a hardware wallet and they tie their funds to it and they're kind of walking around thinking like, okay, my God, if I lose this, I lose my seed phrase, it's just gone. It's a very visceral experience. And I think the thing that's challenging about this space right now is that we don't have a lot of visual cues. So anything else, the complexity behind it isn't. It's a very hard thing to represent the important bits of information without oversimplifying to the point to where you don't kind of respect the security. And I frequently use the example of a car when you're driving a car and you've got this complicated engine that's 10,000 plus moving parts, and you just hop in the car and hit start now. And that took, decades to get to a point to where that was possible. But it's incredibly complex, and it's only at these points where someone gets in an accident and they've hit another car, and you walk out of the car and you're like, wow, like I kind of remember actually how dangerous this actually is. But day to day, because it's become so easy, like you kind of have gotten desensitized to it. And I think the similar thing has happened with money generally and with value storage, because our funds are in a bank, and we've been dependent on these systems, and those systems are changing, and we've had the financial crises. I think those will continue to happen, and we're fortunate now that we have Bitcoin and we have these systems to where you can control your funds directly. You can use multi-sig. You can build up networks of trust amongst your friends or your business partners, your family. Different people can hold different keys. We serve as a trusted third party. We only hold 1 key out of a total of 5 keys in our system, and the end user controls 4, so there's no way we could ever attack the user, but we can provide support. And so we consider ourselves like a sovereign service corporation is what we describe it as. But I think that all of this, it's going to end up in this kind of blended area to where you're doing some key management yourself. You're using multiple services that are out there. You probably will still use some centralized exchanges and some centralized services. But just the ability to manage keys and manage funds is just something that has never really existed before. And most people still have not grasped that fact. And so it'll take some time. But we approach it. We've got designers that have never worked. They're not cryptocurrency people at all. One of them came from Tinder and invented the super like. So anybody that met someone on Tinder is maybe you'll start using key management and have another revolution on this side. But I think it's these consumer experiences that we have to capture the complexity, kind of distill it down to something usable, but not lose and not desensitize users, right, to how serious this stuff is.
And And what's your thoughts on going beyond that? Because again, thinking, if this, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's just other, and this applies, I think, to the private blockchains, and looking at IBM, and if we're kind of tokenizing anything, even on a federated or a private blockchain, there's still a private key somewhere, which still is controlling something. And then when you look at large financial institutions, you've got a multi-tiered system where you're not giving control to even a single office or a single person in a single office. You have a company treasury, and certain people need access to it. And I actually recall having these discussions with my own developer, and it's like, well, who's going to sign this stuff at the end of the day? And it's like, well, they're just calling three senior management team, and they'll all sign a transaction, and it will go. And I'm like, no, they're all on the golf course, and they don't do that sort of thing. That's not how it works in a bank. So it's even going, this kind of personal sovereignty, control, management, and then to a company level, and these policy controls. How do you think we get there? Will we get to a point where, because for me, this pure cold storage model is just not viable in the long run. Well, if it is, there's no point really doing Bitcoin. Yeah. If we end up with Binance, Coinbase, Bitfinex, a few big exchanges, they hold all the Bitcoins. Everyone trusts them and hope it's not the guy from Quadriga, reincarnated, probably. There's no, if everything's just living in a deep, dark data center, there's no point of Bitcoin. How do we get to get this balance where it's liquid at scale, where people doing $50 billion transactions for a hedge fund, we can they can do that in comfort, but without having to give 24 hours notice to someone to kind of break into their own data center to affect this transaction. Do you think that's feasible? What would that look like?
I think unfortunately it's going to take. We're building for that world, and everything we've built so far, and we built on this premium system first. It's $10,000 a year. We are releasing other pricing tiers this year, so we will have other layers. But building better key management generally, social key management, all of these things will lead towards the world that you're talking about, and it is possible. It's just going to take some time and some work, and it's going to take some pain too, because I think again, we've all been. You were describing the executives on the golf course. It's not just on the kind of end user side that we've kind of become desensitized to the fragility of the existing banking system. It's also on the executive side. And these guys, the Wells Fargo guys that rip people off, a lot of them got paid and fired and then paid out, and no one got arrested, no one went to jail, yet they're ripping people off. And so it's there's the system is so complicated that you can't really hold people accountable. And Bitcoin is something that is very visceral. If somebody loses keys, it's very clear. I think that we talked some about kind of building this safety net that you actually want to really dig into this stuff and learn about the stuff. And I encourage everyone here to dig in and read about key management generally. We have some resources online at keys.casa. But I encourage everyone to dig in before something bad happens. We think of what we're doing is kind of like building this safety net in terms of key management with both the service side and the software side. And then when something bad happens, then that's when things will kind of move much faster. So when we do get another major exchange hack, or when we do get another major financial crisis, that's when everybody will that's like the car accident where everyone's like, wow, yeah, this is actually really dangerous. I just kind of forgot how dangerous it really is.
Mm. One thing, again, just in terms of having thought about this, and what struck me is people have spoken about decentralized exchanges and how that works, and trade-offs again. Early, I think people might remember Ripple's, actually, I know it's a dirty word, but Ripple's first example or attempt at a decentralized exchange, which it kind of worked, but it was not going to scale. It was way too slow. And then the next kind of attempts at decentralized exchanges kind of saw the benefit of trade-offs, that the matching, the execution part can probably be centralized. The reconciliation or the actual settlement part can possibly go a layer below. When my guys were thinking about it, it's probably in three parts. You've got an execution, you've probably got a reconciliation that you can trust the people that you know. And then you've got this kind of the actual ultimate settlement layer, which is, if we're looking at Bitcoin, it's the network layer. But then also with the idea of our simple or dumb contracts, not our overly smart contracts, and ideas which you might be able to elucidate on, Matt or Jeremy, around very kind of richly conditional transactions with something like MAST, and what that might bring in. Do we see a point where actually, for me, like the network should actually be able to, we should get to a point where we can program the network to be the custodian. So we're not relying on anyone else, and we can put all the conditions into the custody layer at the network layer. Do you share that vision that we can get there, where a lot of it can really be put down at the network layer, so we're not relying on third parties? Not at all. A backup system, maybe a fail-safe, some ultimate transaction.
That's exactly where we hope things will go, and we're trying to fit into a model to where I described it as not being the organization, not being the centralized party that you're dealing with, but we're just a support organization that everything should operate. Schnorr SIGs are coming, MAST. There are technologies that will make this stuff easier, but there will be speed bumps. And so our job is to be there it is a little bit of a trusted party. We have a principle, can't be evil, that we're trying to, we're minimizing the level of control that we have. But we are there as a support organization that if something does go wrong, you want someone you can actually call. And so we hope it'll get there. We're pushing it there, and it actually makes our lives easier if those systems are running. But when things do fall apart, you're going to call somebody. You're going to need some help. That might be some friends, but a lot of times it will be kind of a professional organization. And that's not centralized. It's kind of centralized support, but a decentralized or distributed system is kind of the idea.
That's good. Not trustless, less trust.
Yes.
That's what we want.
Yeah, and ultimately, remember, in any blockchain system, in any these kind of consensus systems, everyone has to agree on the current state of everything that happens inside of the system. And obviously, not everyone is going to agree that Bob, the specific individual Bob, decided to spend this money. And so, when you're talking about custody, when you're talking about, ideally the world agrees that yes, Bob, specifically this Bob, the same Bob that got the money, agreed to spend it in exactly this way, and they're not currently being held hostage and whatever, but that's not realistic. The world can't all agree on that. So somehow you have to create systems that kind of act as a proxy for the real world. And those proxies have to be described in a automated fashion in a way that is purely programmatic and doesn't itself reference external data. Right, and so you have to introduce oracles. You have to introduce, someone who has a key who actually does check their identity, who acts as an oracle. Thus, you have to introduce these kinds of systems that act as proxies for the real world in some way. And so we're never going to get to a world where, yes, you walk into a bank, you show your ID, and the system automatically updates that. You might get to a world where you walk into a bank and show your ID, and then the bank signs on your behalf because they've checked your ID and know who you are, but a blockchain cannot observe the real world. I mean, hell, a computer system can't even observe the real world, let alone a distributed consensus computer system.
Cool, thank you. I think, again, because I'm just conscious of time and I want to make sure we get some questions in from the audience as well. The other subject that I thought we would get on, because again, something that you've been doing a lot of work on, and again, it's like what this looks like in the future. I mentioned at the beginning, mining is obviously the most critical component of Bitcoin if it's for its existence, and if it's going to be around in the long term, mining will be around. But it's a fascinating example of free market economics. It's purest in many senses. It's kind of virtually zero barrier to entry, and we've seen again over the last few years from home mining on your laptop to the advent of people realizing using GPUs will give them an advantage through to FGPAs and ASICs. And this has created opportunities, it's created problems, it's given us a lot of information over the last couple of years. And that's become an industrial scale industry in its own right now, which is good in many ways, but it's also then opens up more problems and more questions. So Matt, you've been working on a couple of things on that side. You've done a lot of work on the relay network and fiber in terms of making propagation of blocks fairer and quicker. And also looking at possible, these centralization Again, we're looking for ultimate decentralization, but mining, because of the way mining pools evolved, and we've got these very industrial mining farms, there's centralization issues. We saw in 2013 when, I think if people remember, when Ghash, which was a mining pool which managed to exceed 51%, I think, at one point of the network, game theory kicked in. So, it's like, well, game theory will keep Bitcoin alive because no one will kill the golden goose. And that kind of worked then. Ghash were running around telling everyone to get the hell out of their own mining pool. And so that everyone could keep mining and no one would lose faith in the network. We're orders of magnitude beyond that now. So you've been working on Better Hash because we've got this center. I think there's, 5 or 6 like really large mining pools that control good 2/3 of the network. I think China. We've seen a move away from China. But it's still over, 4 mining pools, I think, still control a reasonable amount, over 50% of the network.
2 of which are owned by the same company.
Exactly. And we've seen a growth recently in unknown miners, but that doesn't necessarily give us that much information. So do you mind telling us and the audience a bit about what you've been doing at Better Hash, why it's a good thing, why this is going to kind of strengthen the network as a whole for improved decentralization?
Yeah, boy, you brought up about 4 different points here.
Okay, sorry, we'll crack on.
We'll just go down, start hitting the list. So, at a high level, I want to kind of take 3 steps back and kind of discuss just the concept here, right? So, I like to talk about, when I talk about this stuff, I like to refer to consensus groups because miner is kind of an overloaded term. Is the miner the pool or is it the ASIC operator? It also doesn't apply in proof of stake systems. It doesn't apply in Ripple. It doesn't apply in other blockchain systems. So I like to use the term consensus group. It's kind of more formal, and it's the people involved in building the consensus here. It's also kind of slightly overloaded potentially, but anyway. In this case, so in Bitcoin today, it is the pool operators, the people who actually run the pool and have control over what the hash power mines on. In a proof of stake system, it's the people who have the most capital, right? And so that's probably 4 companies or something. There was a study not too long ago that ancient Mesopotamia had about a similar level of income inequality or wealth inequality as modern society. So somehow I don't think we're going to change that anytime soon. And Ripple is, Ripple, just the Ripple company. And Liquid is whatever, a few exchanges and, all these systems, but they all still have this kind of consensus group, and you can still very clearly define who is responsible for selecting transactions, selecting what gets confirmed, who is capable of double spending or reorging blocks, who is capable of censoring people, all of these good things. And that's ultimately what matters. Not who owns the hash power, not any of these other things. And so Better Hash is an attempt to get away from pools being the consensus group in Bitcoin and back to mining farm operators or people who own the actual hash power being the consensus group. And it does this so there are various historical analogies in the Bitcoin space. For those of you who are familiar with P2 Pool, this is kind of a similar concept. P2 Pool existed back when people were actually using GPU miners way back in the day. It's largely dead, although theoretically you could go put hash power on it if you wanted to. I think there's still a few mega hashes per second or something uselessly small on it. But the idea was it's a peer-to-peer pool. So it is its own blockchain in its own right, built on top of Bitcoin, that mines blocks together and does the payouts to everyone who's involved in its network, not just Bitcoin. So you don't have to trust anyone else, and each miner runs their own full node and these kinds of good things. But that's a lot of overhead, and again, people like to have someone to call who's responsible for dealing with their money. So Better Hash is an attempt to kind of merge these ideas, build something that's simpler, more secure at every layer, and say that you can, optionally at least, miners, the people who own the farms, can run a full node. They can do the important work of selecting transactions, avoiding censoring transactions, select what the current block is, all of these things, and then they still pay to a centralized pool. They still pay into the same pot, and that pool does the work that all these businesses care about of splitting the reward and making sure you get the same payout every day, day in, day out, so that you can make your power bill at the end of the month instead of getting one block every 2 years. So BetterHash is a suite of protocols. For those of you who are more technical, I gave a technical deep dive at the London Bitcoin Devs on Tuesday. That was recorded, so that'll be on YouTube at some point, which is a ton more detail. But at a high level, the goal is to shift kind of quote-unquote power back to the actual miners and the actual people who own the hardware and operate the hardware away from the pools without breaking the pools. The pools are still a business, still have kind of the same business model, and in fact have a little bit of an easier job doing that business, but still operate in a similar way and do kind of their key role.
And what's your approach to actually getting this rolled out? Because I think we've seen, I think especially in the mining community, there can potentially be lazy, potentially kind of try and bypass the rules in terms of validating transactions properly, and quite often be slow to kind of upgrade or adopt some new potential technologies that could help them. Are you going directly to pool operators and kind of actually encouraging them to push this to their own members? Or, I mean, how, the take-up is difficult. I mean, even
that's a good question. Yeah, take-up is absolutely difficult in anything, building. You can go build software that doesn't necessarily mean people will use it. I can't imagine a world where BetterHash adoption will be overnight or particularly quick. It is, like you mentioned, something that you can't show up and say, hey, you're going to make more money if you adopt this, because you won't. It's still going to pay you the same, but you're not increasing Bitcoin's reward in some material way. But it does help Bitcoin, and maybe in the long term, or at least the very long term, maybe that helps the price and maybe that helps adoption. So it's a lot of sales, it's a lot of trying to generate excitement around this, trying to go to people who have small mining farms and get them to ask their pool to integrate it, talk to pools who are maybe more, let's say, ideologically aligned with Bitcoin and with the concepts of actually making these systems decentralized and building them for the long haul and not just trying to extract rent where they can, and trying to kind of, get adoption in little niches, and then from there make it kind of a default option so that it can snowball over the next 10 years. But I can't imagine it's going to be a fast process. Yeah. It'll be a slow burn, but that's okay. Awesome. Bitcoin's not here for last year or next year. It's
6 more years. I heard it's got 6 more years.
Yeah. Maybe. Okay. I don't know.
That's enough. Get it out there.
I don't know. It's probably an asteroid will hit the Earth. We're going to be dead in about a year,
okay.
So.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll have a bet on that. We'll probably use it. We can use Augur and have a bet on Augur.
Does that work? Will Augur keep working if the Earth's gone?
Probably.
Does that?
Well, that's a bet we can have. When's the Earth going?
Oh, good point.
So many things we can use Augur for. Sorry. I could ask more questions. I do have more questions, but I'll ask them afterwards. I don't want to keep everyone waiting. We've got pizza coming. Good. And so let's get some pizzas here. Okay, no one rush for the pizza. Health and safety issues. Questions for the audience. Who's got the microphone? Oscar, where are you? Nick? Oh, Oscar's doing pizzas just at the wrong time. We'll ask questions anyway. Can you repeat them for now, because we don't have the... So, sir, here, question for our esteemed panelists.
What do you guys think of central blockchain companies that, for example, for oracles that use Intel SGX? For the audience, that's like, imagine a ledger in your latest Intel processor that is kind of unhackable and safe, and so far it is. Thanks.
Is that? Yeah. And so, for example, for oracles, we get the data like the temperature, and the company works with this data, and this black box, like Intel SGX, is auditable and unhackable. So what do you think? Do you have any opinion on that?
Oracles, I think obviously, I guess I already mentioned oracles kind of are going to have to exist, right? Because people want some amount of real-world data for use in blockchains. There's many forms they can take, and that'll have to exist. SGX doesn't really solve that problem, though, right? Because SGX itself has similar requirements as what information you could feed into a blockchain, right? information has to be validatable on a given program, so you have to be able to provide all of the input that's required. And of course, you could do a similar thing in you could do a similar thing in a blockchain system, or you could do a similar thing using ZKCP, so zero knowledge contingent payments, using ZK snarks. You could do a similar thing by feeding it into bulletproofs if you don't want the trusted setup, blah, blah, blah. So I can't say I'm particularly excited about SGX. It doesn't materially help the Oracle problem, I don't think. We're going to have oracles, and SGX is cool, and it solves some problems that, maybe there's a lot of computation that's too expensive to do in ZK snarks. ZK snarks are a relatively expensive computing environment. And so maybe SGX ends up helping there. Of course, SGX has had bugs. It is completely closed source. The only people who know how any of it works are Intel, and you would have to audit the actual CPU device in order to find that out. It's completely trusting Intel because Intel has the keys and can create arbitrary systems that if their keys got broken. There are other SGX-like systems that replace Intel with ARM vendors, Qualcomm, whatever, but they all have kind of a similar set of properties there.
I agree with everything, all the points that you made. So I'm not an expert in secure element tech or in core hardware. SGX is the secure Intel secure element. For people that we've been talking around or tossing around SGX, but I don't think anybody really defined what it actually is. But ultimately, I think that the code is closed source. Nobody knows what's in there. Nobody knows if Intel could break it. That's a huge problem. Ultimately, in an open source software, I think secure elements generally are kind of in a so-so state. I think long term that we will come to trust that there's an open source code, there's some level of provable process around the manufacturing of even the hardware that you get. Maybe it comes down to the trust in a company over time, and the instant it's invalidated, the company just goes out of business. But there's something that will happen in terms of key devices and in terms of signing, with it being more open source, with maybe it's literal video screens in the manufacturing center. I don't know. I mean, there's something about needing to be able to trace the entire supply chain of some of these devices that we're going to be depending on so heavily. We've built, so as we think about multi-sig, our system uses it's multi-sig, multi-device, multi-location, and the reason for that multi-device is actually because of supply chain attacks. There is a risk that some provider, it may not even be the provider's fault, it could be some malicious actor that gets access to the manufacturing facility, even a state actor. So there are going to be lots of tests of a lot of the secure signing technology, and kind of our approach is that it's going to be about doing some validation, potentially directly in person, and being able to regenerate keys if something fails, or if you mistrust that this key was, or this device was somehow compromised, well, let me get a new device, and then redo some validation with the person I'm trying to trust and interact with, or the oracle that I'm trying to interact with, and kind of execute from there. But more rapid generation of keys. I'll kind of leave it in a summary of more rapid generation of keys. General secure elements probably not going to survive more than just the initial marketing phase that they're in now. And a lot of open source tech and a lot more validation with, again, even like videos or some other proof of the entire supply chain process.
Yeah, and I don't mean to. I mean, we're sitting here hating on SGX and secure elements in general. They can be a nice additive security thing. Definitely don't rely on them. And currently, they're not necessarily implemented in that way. There are schemes to make hardware wallets that exist today much more additive. So right now, it would be very trivial for a hardware wallet to, without you knowing, and in fact, without you, information theoretically, without you being able to detect that they're doing this, leak your private keys to an attacker. There are schemes where we can prevent that. And there are schemes that people have proposed that are relatively old and just haven't been implemented, where you can make it so that having the hardware wallet is completely additive with just running the wallet on your computer. You'd have to compromise both in order to lose your funds, instead of today, where you only have to compromise the hardware wallet, you only have to create a fake hardware wallet and sell it on eBay, and all of a sudden you get the money. Now you have to actually also compromise people's computer in a way that you have to today. So, that was a long answer to this question. So
Great question, though.
Okay, I've got a question I think is primarily for Jeremy, but perhaps Matt has something to add to the answer as well. Do you currently have, or is there a plan in the works to support something that's like a completely trustless dead man's switch for a Bitcoin will, for like inheritance? Because I know currently we can do something like a hash lock time contract thing, but if I create that and then spend from those UTXOs, it will invalidate that. So I have to like segregate my funds into like this amount will be for my inheritance, and this will be my spending money. And then if I like spend between those two amounts, if I mess up that segregation, my will be broken. So like I'm wondering how we can come up with a solution for that that's completely trustless.
Awesome question. A couple of our other team members are smiling at me because we've been talking about like this exact issue, and there's a massive issue around inheritance that has not been highlighted yet at all. I think that the answer to your question is that, without going into too much detail, I think that you're going to end up with multiple key schemes. That's like no matter what, you're going to end up with multiple key schemes. The lockout procedures. So I'll describe kind of how our current system works and some of the lockout procedures that we have currently, and then I'll get around some of the edges of what we're thinking about without going into too much detail just yet. But there's more coming for 2019 on the second part. So first part is that so currently we've set up a 3 of 5 multi-sig, and you have this really easy to use interface. So syncing keys, you can go buy a key off the shelf. You can go buy a hardware wallet, so a Trezor or a Ledger. You can pop it into our system. It syncs in just a couple seconds. It's really fast. So adding new keys is really fast. So your ability to recover and swap in a new key if one key becomes compromised, you can mark that one key as compromised and then rotate in a new key, and we use the other 4 synced keys that we have, regenerate a new address set for you, and then audit and a very smooth process, all of, again, 30 seconds, do a wallet sweep, execute a wallet sweep transaction. You can even do this wallet sweep transaction by UTXO set. So you can do a very advanced process to send all of your funds over to the new key set and be totally secure again. So we've opted for the security model of rapid response instead of just kind of locking things down. And within that, though, we do have you still maintain full control because you have 4 total keys and we only have 1. So if you do have a failure to the point to where you've lost 2 keys and now you only have 3 keys left, of which we're 1, then you would have to come to us to be able to get your funds back. But for the most part, you're pretty independent. On top of that, we have another feature that's an emergency lockdown button, and that button locks out your account, but it does not lock you out of the access to your keys. So you still have access to your devices, but at least our systems, we've built iPhone app, we have an Android app that's about to launch, full web apps. We make it really easy to use multi-sig. It's still possible for you because you have the key devices. Once you initiate the emergency lockdown, it's still possible for you to gain access to the funds, but it's going to take you hours or days because you're going to have to be constructing transactions manually at a command line. And similarly, an attacker would also have to manually, the attacker could still reach you, right? But they would have to manually go get all of your keys in different locations and then work at the command line level, and it would take a while for them to gain access to your funds. And that's a signal, whenever you hit the emergency lockdown button, we hear it, we know that there's an emergency lockdown, and so we're immediately calling the authorities, the police or whoever else, or whatever security procedure you've put in place, and every client kind of has a custom procedure of who we're calling. But that's kind of what exists today, and that is a system that gives you this security response while you still have control, while you still have ease of use, but doesn't take away kind of authority or present issues, if you had locked something in a time lock or it's in some inheritance process. So the kind of second answer around the inheritance side, and I'll try to keep this quick because I know we're kind of close on time, but the second answer around inheritance is that I think it will still use multi-sig. There's a bunch of considerations around the current legal process for gaining access to safety deposit boxes, or for the executor of an estate with a lawyer, that have to come into play on this inheritance side. And so it's much more complicated than what I described in the first case. But what I'll say is that kind of where we're headed, if you can think about that first case and the simplified options and the ability to kind of lock down a system but have some support, we're thinking about that in context of inheritance and how all that plugs into the legal system as well. But there will be solutions that come, but it's a good thing, and it's a thing that everybody should be thinking about, these questions.
Can we get one more question? Smell pizza, and we're all starving. So one more, and we can all chat afterwards. Thank you.
Probably a question for Matt more than anything. So Bitcoin Core version 0.16, 17, 18. Is there a conversation, if at all, or what's that like on a Bitcoin 1.0? I understand there's not like product owners, and like versioning releases for software is kind of like something that you don't probably pay too much attention to. It's software in general, but is there a conversation about when Bitcoin 1.0 would ever be ready, or like what that would even require or demand or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Cool. So,
Finish. Perfect pre-pizza
No,
question.
good question.
Good question.
so Satoshi will one day come out with Bitcoin
no,
1.0 right
no.
And the central banks will end that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just like Bitcoin, you can just keep adding decimal places anyway when
Yeah,
you need to.
it's whatever.
Exactly. Never need to
It's
get
going to
there.
go to milli-satoshis still.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you,
Matt.
Paul. This has been great. Thank you, all of you.
I hope everyone enjoyed it.